This court ruling is extremely regrettable. A short while ago, Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs Akiba strongly protested to South Korea's ambassador to Japan and told him that this is absolutely unacceptable for the Japanese government.
Robert Kelly is a professor in the Department of Political Science and Diplomacy at Pusan National University, and he joins us now live from Busan. It's a pleasure to have you on the program, Professor. Now, Japan is saying they're not accepting the order, which they view as a violation of a deal made back in 2015. Talk us, if you can, through that deal and why this case has reappeared in the court.
Right. So this debate between Japan and Korea, it's been pretty acrimonious for a while. It goes back really several decades, in fact. And there was a big push about 4 or 5 years ago under the previous president to kind of get some final deal in this, to sort of wrap this up, because it had become a really large, outstanding problem. It had begun to impact South Korea and Japan's alliance relationship with the United States. It had security ramifications in this region regarding China and North Korea and things like that. So there's a big effort back in 2015 to wrap this up. And so there was a deal signed. But in South Korea, there was a lot of sort of resentment of the deal because it wasn't really openly discussed with the public. It was kind of pulled out at the last minute in secret. A number of the groups that were affected weren't directly consulted. And sort of the opposition at the time, the political left, didn't like it. They took the presidency a couple of years later, and they have begun to sort of unwind that relationship. And that's where we stand now, right? It's sort of up in the air in South Korea. Increasingly here, the issue has become legalized. It's begun to go through the courts rather than through the political system. And today is this big ruling. And I don't think anybody's surprised the Japanese rejected it, though.
Right. And these women that were abused are ultimately paying the price, having to deal with the trauma every single day of their lives. Take us back into history and walk us through, if you can, some of the scenarios that these women found themselves in.
Right, so this is very, very contentious, right? What specifically happened? There's been a lot of research, and there's been a lot of conflicting claims. But the basics are that when the Imperial Japanese Army began to conquer Asia in the 1930s and 1940s, it basically set up a brothel system, and in many cases an enforced brothel system, which is to say they pulled out local women from the places they conquered and forced them into this. And it wasn't just in Korea, it was sort of around the greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere, as the Japanese called it at the time. This was particularly prevalent with the army. And many of those women, the survivors, have sort of come forward in the years since and said, this happened to me, and the Japanese government for a while, really regrettably, just sort of pretended like this didn't really happen. And then it just sort of got more and more and more, it just sort of increased, not just in Korea, but sort of all over the region. And the Japanese government has been sort of forced in the last 20 or 30 years to address this. You can see the imagery right here. But the conflict has been most intense here in Korea for, I think, reasons that are more than just the comfort when it's about Korean competition with Japan and things like that. There are a lot of other sort of national stories going on here. But this isn't just about what happened here in Korea. It's sort of what the Japanese did, across the region.
Definitely. There already is this deep-rooted mistrust, as we know, between the two countries because of Japan's colonial rule of Korea. But to what extent do you think this will strain relations between the two countries who, as you mentioned, are facing the same issues, such as North Korea's nuclear threat and China's growing military influence in the region?
It doesn't help, but to be honest, I don't think it will make it that much worse, in the sense that it's already pretty bad over this issue. Korea and Japan just don't see eye to eye on this. They're just not, and honestly, they're really not even that close, to be blunt about it. Even the historical research on this is really far off. There's a lot of debate about whether or not these women were forced and were they compensated and were some of them prostitutes or not. I mean, the debate is really, really nasty and really, really sharp, to be quite honest. And I'm just not sure that the two are really going to be able to bridge this gap. I think that was the hope with 2015, is that the deal in 2015 might be something where we could sort of agree to disagree and kind of move on. Mm-hmm. But that it's just come unstuck, and I'm not really sure. The Americans used to kind of play a bridging role, but I'm not really sure the U.S. can do that anymore. We're kind of at rock bottom, so I'm not actually sure how much worse this makes it, but it doesn't help.
All right, Professor Robert Kelly, thank you so much for joining us on the program and sharing that analysis with us.